Chapter 2, Recording Number 4, Germain, Wednesday, August 28th, 1991, 12:43 p.m., Year 5, Day 12. Expanding Universe. The concept of the expanding universe grew out of the present belief that the universe was created aeons ago by some cataclysmic effect that created a ball of heat which is now expanding into the presumed nothingness of space. To say that the universe will die because the light which God is will go out is equivalent to saying that God, its creator, will die or will cease to think. You would not say of yourself that you will die if you cease to think, or, in a more humorous vein, perhaps everyone in general are already dead, for we see very few signs of genuine thinking. That concept is not worthy of intelligent, reasoning men. In studying our diagrams, therefore, take special note of the fact that the axis of all waves which compress or generate are at 90-degree angles to those which expand or radiate. The column law. The column law raises the most momentous questions of all time, questions which the greatest logicians of history have been unable to solve. Mathematics will not solve them with equations which are but assumptions. No man can solve that supreme mystery except one who knows the cosmic source and cause of all things. It is a small wonder that Newton was deceived. His senses perceived that an apple fell to the ground. He did not perceive that as the apple fell, its equal in potential arose simultaneously from the ground, and sequentially the entire apple arose from the ground, and its equal potential fell to it. The law reads as follows: like poles repel, and unlike poles attract. Coulomb uses the term magnetism under the assumption that this universe is an electromagnetic one, but that means matter, which is the term used by Newton. Both of them overlooked the vital fact that there is a zero of attraction and repulsion between stars or planets and between poles of a bar magnet. Astronauts find that zero position, but they do not call it magnetism. They call it gravity, and that is what it is. Iron filings will not adhere to the center of a bar magnet. Textbooks show that they will adhere only to the poles. It seems as illogical for Coulomb to have assumed that the iron fillings were attracted to the bar magnet, which should properly be termed a gravity bar, as it is for Newton to have assumed that the falling apple was attracted to earth. To have told either of them that both the apple and the filings were projected there by the force of compression exerted from the outward toward the inward direction instead of pulling inward from without would have been met with a blank stare and not listened to. That is the right explanation of it, however, and it is our responsibility to explain it so clearly that any open-minded present-day scientist will see how consistently it fits into nature's simple pattern. A greater knowledge of the light wave and its cycles is, therefore, necessary, for we again say that the secrets of the universe lie within the wave. As light waves have their 9-octave multiplying power to bring invisible light of negligible heat into visible intensely hot suns and nebulae, and as international science is still unaware of that process, we are revealing it as our step-by-step way of completing our roadmap into space. Heretofore we have said that the universe consists of the undivided universe of rest and the divided universe of motion. The first known illuminate, the Krishna of the Bhagavad Gita, used the term over and over again. It is not complete, however. It accounts for but half of the wave cycle. Heretofore, in these writings, we have not completed it because neither you nor science were ready to receive it. Recent discoveries in world laboratories have indicated that science is now ready for some new input, for the ones who recognize the mechanisms have developed some pretty gross and spectacular things through this comprehension. Remember, truth of a scientific fact works for the just and the unjust, and thus far, the higher technology has been thrust to deceit and delusion, destruction, and the furthering of evil intent. It is time for man to wake up and take control and return knowledge into the lighted intent. There are some real miracles appearing to come forth from the laboratories, and honest scientists who dare speak out confirm the fact that this totally new cosmogony is gradually being comprehended in scientific circles. It is a major reason why the media and press has to be placed under total control and be silenced. The complete description of the wave is the undivided and the divided multiplied universe. This completes the cycle. The divided universe accounts for but one swing of the cosmic pendulum. It does not account for its countless repetitions, which have given you a universe which had no beginnings and has no endings. This new two-way principle accounts for the simultaneous invisible swing of the pendulum from its zero of stillness to its compression focus and back again through expansion. It also accounts for the voidance principle, which makes of this universe an imagined one in which every happening anywhere is voided by its equal unhappening everywhere. It accounts for the motion picture universe of illusion, which many great thinkers have suggested as a probability, for if the light of man's cinema were turned off, the sequential stills which constitute the illusion of motion would disappear. So also would the sequential waves of light of the cosmic cinema of the Creator's thinking disappear into blank space. In thus closing the discussion of the column law, I again repeat, every action-reaction of wave motion is voided as it occurs, is repeated as it is voided, and is recorded as it is repeated. Solenoid coils improperly wound. Another failure of international science is not to have discovered that the solenoid coils of its research laboratories are improperly, therefore inefficiently, wound. Did Mr. Tesla realize this? Indeed he did, and that is when the real thrust was made to get rid of him. Not having discovered that the universe is an optical universe of gravity-controlled light instead of an electromagnetic one, it has wound its coils cylindrically instead of conically. Also, it has wound them without taking consideration of the collisions which necessitate opposite clockwise and counterclockwise directions for each coil to create maximum gravity power without violating nature's one direction. The diagram shows how they should be wound. See Figure 34. Also, it is not discovered that there are 4 pairs of gravity poles on each gravity bar instead of only 1 pair at its ends. There must be in order to account for the octave multiplying and dividing power which the wave is created to fulfill. These 4 focal pairs are located on each side of its centering zero, the square of the distance from each other. They not only create the elements of compressed light and heat, but also create the spectrum which is the measure of heat as well as being the sex and life principles of the creation. The 2 and end zeros represent the inert gases of their octaves, and the centering zero marks the collision point of maximum heat. The sun and all lesser matter are created and stepped up from cathodes to anodes. See Figure 29a. The diagram 34, 34a, and 35 tells how nature winds its solenoid coils, all going around their axis in the same direction, but each coil having a clockwise direction from one center and a counterclockwise direction from the other. This accounts for an equator for the expansion ends, the cathodes of cold space, and another equator for the compression ends, the anodes of hot suns. A little consideration given to this process of nature will dispel any wonderment as to the source of the sun's energy, and also it will account for the curvature of gravity in space. Note that Figure 35 parallels the same effect in the union of the sexes. It is an axiom of science that no more power can be taken from a generator than that which the generator puts into it. Let us consider this carefully. Any electrical engineer would reasonably ask why these solenoids give more power than your power plant puts into them. The answer goes back to the principle of the undivided stillness and the pairs of opposites which comprise the divided universe in motion. Nature's suns are the result of maximum motion and maximum heat. Your planets do not receive that maximum heat of your suns. The heat which they receive has been divided by its radiation. If your Earth received the entire undivided heat, it would be equally as hot, and so would all of the other planets. Ooh, here we get to the pictures. Figure 34. Read it first. This is to demonstrate nature's way of winding her solenoids. She uses but one direction for compression and the same one for expansion. For compression thrusts inward from without, and expansion thrusts outward from within. There is no force in nature which pulls inward from within. Gravity accounts for that force. Therefore, Newton was in error when he said that gravity pulls inward from within. Note that the steel core is conical. Power multiplies that way. Also note that the wiring divides in the middle of the coil and increases its turns in the direction of compression. Gravity heats that way. It is the way suns come into being. That is the way anodes multiply from cathodes. From anodes to cathode zeros, the direction is counterclockwise, and from cathodes to anodes, the direction is clockwise, as it is in suns and planets. By omitting the centering units, power can be generated for heat and light in homes and cities. By including them, they will become incandescent, and that gravity heat could be enclosed in a boiler to which heat units would also be attached and thus become a reactor as powerful as an atomic reactor, according to the number of coils used in series, by leading to a steam turbine. Atomic reactors could then make use of this principle and without the danger of using atomic power. That is, heat simultaneously increases by compressing cold from without, and cold simultaneously increases by expanding heat from within. This is the device which I wish we would all build. Do that. That's the one. That's the zero-point energy device. You can use teleportation, transmutation, other things. Let's get this other picture going sideways. The spiraling thought light waves of creation revolve around the zero stillness, gravity centering, controlling, balancing. The force of gravity is by compression toward the inside from the outside, not by pulling from within. Let's call it a gravity bar, not bar magnet. There's 4 pairs of gravity poles that focus spiraling light into wheels of compressed light spectrum elements. That's talking about this picture here. It's very important. Let's see, well, pause the video, zoom in, or pull up the Phoenix Journal. Follow along while I read. More pictures. This illustrates, in this next picture, this illustrates the parallel effect of the properly wound solenoid coil in the sex principle of nature. It also indicates its relation to the spectrum of the sun, in which the white centered yellows divide the red and blue sides of the sun. And that was a description of this picture here, male and female. And this one, got this little stick figures talking. One on the left side says, from this viewpoint it's turning clockwise. And the guy on the right, from this viewpoint it's turning counterclockwise. Spiraling continuously toward each other. But we know it's revolving in only one direction. It's how you look at it. A pair of opposites extending toward each other from the undivided stillness. Your home power plants are the prototypes of your suns. In them is the maximum heat which the voltage of power used will give to them. That may be thousands of kilowatts. That power is divided into millions of lights and outlets in a town or city. If each of those lights and outlets received the full power of their generator, they would burn up as planets would do if they received the undivided, broadly distributed power received from their Towns generator. The same principle applies to the power of a man. He also can give no more power to any task than he has received for building his body. That is true, but he does not give his full power to small tasks like opening an egg or polishing a window, else he would destroy them. They also receive his much divided power. To lift 1 pound takes but a little of the power that is in him, but to lift 150 pounds might take all of it. Thus it is with the 100 outlets which are your house. You can take out of them only the divided power they receive from your home plant. But if you take 10 of those outlets and connect them with a series of conical coils, you can heat a disk of steel to incandescence at their gravity centers with the coil itself, while also creating heat units with the current at the anode points where the current collides. In this manner, you have taken more heat from your current outlets than they have given to you. Rutherford-Bohr theory of atomic structure. Let us look at this theory, for as we conclude this lesson, we need to question the validity of that Rutherford-Bohr theory of atomic structure. The preceding pages picture a consistent universe of interchanging swings of the cosmic pendulum, which have no resemblance to the familiar diagram which we print here. See figure 36. The atomic structure misconcept. That would be this guy right there. That's a misconception. That's not how it is. I know why. Allow us to question this theory. It claims that every atom has molecules which is held together by some mysterious glue, but no scientist has yet discovered what that glue is. Every scientist does know, however, that a compression pump will not only produce heat, but will hold it together as one mass, and that a vacuum pump will take the heat out of it and produce cold. Why search any longer for that glue? For compression lies at the end of that useless search. Science also claims that its nuclei are surrounded by various layers of electrons, which revolve around them in certain mathematical layers and planes which do not parallel the equator of its nucleus. Nature gives no precedent for such a peculiar action. Suns and planets are surrounded solely by rings which revolve around their equators. These rings wind up into planets which gradually leave their planes of birth, as the outer planets beyond Mercury have done and as Mercury will also do. They still revolve around their centering suns, but in an outward direction and not at fixed levels. Nature has no precedent for that action, for all motion is spiral. The directional movement of all planets is centrifugal. If science really knew what electrons are, it would not sustain that theory for 1 second. When we discuss the Russell new chart of the elements, we will tell what they are, and this will greatly help science in the work on electrons. Suffice it for here to say that the electrons do not revolve in orbits around any nucleus. In fact, they do not have a nucleus. They spring from the zero inert gases of their octave toward a nucleus in the first element of their fourth octave, as lithium springs from helium, then multiply in cube ratio at each step toward carbon. Science has already found such a particle which acts like an electron, but is 200 times more powerful. Further discussion about it is useless at this point, for if the foregoing is not sufficiently convincing, then further consideration would not aid it, but compound the incomprehension. New laws of thermodynamics. As we move along into the new laws of thermodynamics, I am going to give respect and reverence to the man who penned them to paper for you once. It was Walter Russell, and he received them directly from me as I now write, except that his was a comprehension capacity and not simply as a translator of the information. Some of you will read this and say, well, then it's hardly new because Russell is long dead. How many of you understand them from the time Russell shared them as he brought them forth for you? I thought so. Hardly anyone. Your world would have already been turned about and headed toward God if you had understood. Most of you readers will have never even heard of Russell, except through these writings or in research from these writings. Ah, 'tis indeed sad, for these men came forth out of their time to test the readiness, and have always found it lacking. I hope it happens not this time also, for your sequence of events precludes further dragging opportunities. Now is the time, human brothers. It is make it or break it time. In the last lesson, we stated that a distinguished scientist said that he believed you would soon learn how to control gravity, from which marvelous results would follow. I also relayed that science has already been able to control gravity for a long time, but does not know that it has done so. Let us consider this by giving a few examples. One conspicuous example is the projection of satellites into gravity-free orbits around the Earth. More conspicuous still is the demonstrated fact that astronauts can accompany those satellites and reduce their speed at will in order to lower them to the ground, where ground forces can control their areas of landing. The very fact of ground crews knowing where they are at all times is another conquest of gravity. To be able to talk to them from thousands of miles away is still another conquest, for, heretofore, man has been able to talk to others only by wire until radio, television, and radar had been discovered. I use this example, for these are what you, the public, are allowed to see and know. There are incredible things which are hidden intentionally from you, and yet there is no use utilizing those things as example, for you have nothing with which to relate the information. This all grew from the conquest of gravity by the airplane itself. Such a miracle would have been considered an impossibility during the end of the last century. A familiar quotation then was, you could no more do that than you could fly. This phrase would seem strange to the coming generation. The greater miracle in the conquest of gravity could be thought of by man What greater miracle in the conquest of gravity could be thought of by man than the power to hurl rockets and explosive missiles thousands of miles into space, and to control the spot on the other side of the Earth or across its poles upon which their projectors desire them to land? Equally great is the power of an adversary to meet those missiles, which they can find in midair at great distances from their point of projection, with others. This is already such a mundane capability that it becomes totally ridiculous that you, the public, would buy into such lies as that which happened in Iraq. Right now there is pictured an installation of the giant bull cannon in Iraq, which takes up the entire side of a hill, openly visible. How is it that mosques were hit, dwellings and shelters, and the nuclear installations and such as the bull cannon were not touched? America alone has satellite capability set up for control of you by the bankers, called the Star Wars Defense System, which allows for reading a business card of a specific person from orbit. The same for audio signals. So guess who is fooling who? The conquest of gravity by liquefying gases, even to inert gases, is still another seeming impossibility, for it is a reversal of nature's process of heating. Even as the freezing of soft metals to harder ones of greater conductivity is further evidence of the increasing power of the mind of man. Even the ability to create the fuels which hurl these missiles and satellites is another one of man's miracles. It is also a transmutation process, for it divides the very elements to get that part of them which serves their purpose and discards the other parts. As a last example of the many uses which could be cited of gravity control is the power of science to take from the high-octave elements, such as zirconium, which gravity has multiplied by its compression power, and make them into transistors. These do thousands of times as much as the old electric storage batteries do, but no scientist would think of gravity as being its cause. This is because science thinks of gravity in the Newtonian concept. Manufacturers of computers have been enabled to do great things with gravity and simplify their machines because of it. They too, however, are unaware of the true nature of gravity. Up to a century ago, man had not begun to make any conspicuous use of the power to control gravity. God alone had that power. When the steam engine was invented, that God power began to multiply in man. That is what God intends for man who is created to manifest his Creator on earth. God's highest goal for man is his own omnipotence and omniscience. Man already has God's omnipresence, for his every thought and action extended to the furthermost star and end in himself. That includes their unity with every other human on earth, and this spells out the brotherhood of man relationship. The tragedy of present-day humanity is that mankind is not aware of its power, nor of its real source, for if it were aware of those things, man could not possibly slaughter other men in his barbarous, unholy wars. New laws. This will deal with that which we will simply refer to henceforth as Russell's new laws of thermodynamics. Past lessons, and especially the just prior one, have very plainly explained the Creator's process of causing a visible universe of hot light of suns and stars to appear from the inconceivably cold light of space, and then to disappear into it, or, as man describes it, to be swallowed up by it. Yet man has never yet been able to discover that process. The main reason for that failure is that this concept of the creation of the visible light universe is that it was created out of some cataclysmic happening in the universe which resulted in a great ball of fire. Believing this, he reasons that the ball of fire will gradually cool by splitting up into smaller balls of fire. That belief is the basis of his theory that energy lies in matter itself, and of the expanding universe which will cause the eventual death of the universe. The name given to that cosmic death is entropy. Out of that same concept of the birth of the creation grew the belief that energy cannot run uphill but only downhill. To formulate that into a system, the first and second laws of thermodynamics were formed, with emphasis on the second. It is very strange that such a code of laws could ever have been written or followed as sacrosanct by modern science, in view of the fact that every laboratory on Earth is today making energy run uphill by multiplying the stillness of 15 pounds of pressure per square inch to thousands of pounds of pressure by compressing room temperature to an incandescence, which can melt the hardest steel into vapors in a few seconds. Let me quote what one Sir Oliver Lodge says about it in his book entitled Energy. Sir William Thomson, a great authority, found it difficult to realize that in a steam engine the heat not only fell down in temperature from boiler to condenser, but that, unlike water, heat was actually consumed in the process, so that less heat was given to the condenser than was taken from the boiler. Of course it was, for the heat expanded into cold in the process to again heat by compression, like rain becoming compressed from hot vapors by falling into the sea. I continue the quote. That is not so in a hydraulic engine, nor in an electric. Just as much electricity flows away from a motor as flows to it. The work is done at the expense of the drop in voltage, but heat engines were exception. Heat not only fell in temperature, but was actually consumed and turned into other forms of energy. Of course the voltage will drop. The heat turns into cold, which generates heat by compressing it. We again quote our new law of the cycles, which makes the universe of motion continuous. Cold generates, generation heats, heat radiates, and radiation cools. Each is the reaction of each other's action. Each gives birth to its opposite mate. Life begets death, and death begets life, inbreathing forces and outbreathing. To continue the quoting, this is now sometimes called the first law of thermodynamics, which is a definite assertion that heat is energy. Work can only be done by passing or transferring energy from something at high level or potential or temperature to something else at lower level or potential or temperature. So to a hydraulic engineer, all the water in the sea is useless, for it is all the same level. The fact that water tends to run downhill and reach the sea is an example of dissipation of available energy. It may do work on the journey, but the ultimate result is stagnation. The fact that bodies actually cool, or in other words, that heat tends to flow down from high temperature to low, is another example. This is not in accord with natural law. The new laws of thermodynamics fully contradict this reasoning. We again quote a conspicuous truth from Lodge's The Ether of Space. Light is an electromagnetic disturbance. Optics is a branch of electricity. That is not in accord with natural law. Light is the one thing which constitutes creation. The fact that man can produce visible light by shortening the long waves of invisible light through resisting its flow, as a meteorite does, or by the friction of a dynamo wheel or a solenoid coil, or even by shuffling his feet upon a carpet and touching metal, does not warrant man to conclude that he created light. All of the consummate illuminates, such as the Krishna of the Bhagavad Gita, Emmanuel, and Buddha, have told you that God is light. To presume that man has created light by his own activities is to claim that he has created God. If optics is a branch of electricity, it is strange that no book on optics that you have around ever makes any mention of electricity as being its basis. Optics itself makes one conspicuous mistake, and it is a most serious one because it misleads one as to the nature of light. It constantly speaks of, in diagrams, parallel rays of light. There are no parallel rays of light in the whole universe. They either diverge or converge. Look about you to your own room at night. Every light in it sends curved diverging rays which converge in every other light. Look down from a plane onto cities and separating meadows. You see the prototypes of stars and star clusters in which high potential short waves lead to low potential long waves and curved rays which converge in every other light in the universe in the same manner. That is God's way of intercommunicating and recording the actions and reactions of interchanging pairs of opposites in his universe. And that is man's way also of multiplying space silence into audible sound by his radar system. In fact, the multiplication of silence into sound parallels man's multiplication of invisible light into visible light. Both light and silence are eternal and basic, while visible light and sound are transient repetitions. In spite of the above refuting facts, Lodge in the same book says, "Not yet do we realize what we are doing. Not yet have we any dynamical theory of electric currents, of static charges, and of magnetism. Not yet, indeed, have we any dynamical theory of light. And when the present century, or the century after, lets us deeper into their secrets, and the secrets of other phenomena now in the course of being investigated, I feel that it will be no merely material prospect that will be opening on our view, but some glimpse into a region of the universe which science has never entered yet, but which has been sought from afar, and perhaps blindly apprehended by painter and poet, by philosopher and saint." This prophecy is already unfolded, strangely enough, by ones who do not proclaim to be scientists. Scientists seem only to take that which another scientist proclaims and furthers the lie. Who is there, therefore, who dares say that this knowledge can only come from books and teachings of men whose concepts are forever changing, and whose teachings have likewise changed? From the flat world concepts to the Ptolemy, Copernicus, Newton, Faraday, Tesla, and Rutherford-Bohr concepts. The laws. 1. Cold generates energy. Heat radiates energy. Cold multiplies. It cannot divide, for it is the fulcrum of the universe, which must extend to multiply. Heat divides. It cannot multiply, but can be multiplied. 2. Every action must be preceded and followed by its equal and opposite reaction. Heat is the reaction of cold. Heat could not come into being save for the compressive action of cold, nor could it repeat itself without losing itself in basic cold. 3. Cold is static, unchanging, and unconditioned. It eternally lives. Cold light is the basic one thing of this universe. Heat waves are dynamic, forever changing and dually conditioned. They are eternally living and dying to simulate life. 4. Cold light is the omnipresent basis of universal intelligence and energy. Hot waves of light, which man calls matter, are a simulation of intelligence and energy. There is no intelligence or energy in matter. 5. Static cold and dynamic heat express their opposite energies at angles of 90 degrees from their axis of rotation. Cold retains its static, motionless condition along wave axes where motion ceases at points of maximum heat, while heat extends along equators to again expand as cold. This balanced interchanging completes the wave cycle. 6. Cold compresses. Cold multiplies cold to create heat. Heat expands to divide heat into cold. Varied pressures of heat constitute the octave color spectrum cycles and the octave chemical cycles of matter. Their varied wavelengths are the basis of your mathematics. 7. Long, low waves of low potential and high frequencies constitute the invisible spectrum and low-density gases, while short, high waves of high potential and low frequencies constitute the basis for high density. It is our hope that deep consideration of the consistency of these laws will point out to all workers in science the fact that the old laws have actually been but words to them and become a habit-like, deep-seated tradition, for they have not followed them in their laboratory practices. Let us leave this portion, for I ask that you review until you memorize the preceding laws, for we shall be expanding on them. When we pen again, we shall consider sound and silence. Thank you. I am Germain.